And actually, fascinatingly, much of tomorrow's world came true, when they were trying to predict the future, which is really interesting. The idea that we would all have phones in our pockets or small computers and so much more.
Hello and welcome. My name's Doug Gordon. I'm host of the show, Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories, where the aim of the show is to interview inspiring people who've either been successful in their field or inspired us success in some form. Today's guest is Dr. Lollie Mancey. Lollie is one of the leading anthropologists in the world. She's also a serial entrepreneur, keynote speaker, presenter, and program director for the Innovation Academy at University College Dublin. She's been featured on TV, radio, and some of the biggest stages in the world, inspiring people with insights on human culture and behaviour. I had the pleasure of seeing her being interviewed in person and thought she was truly inspirational, and I'm delighted to have her on the show. Lollie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I saw you obviously at the Positive Lives event, and I really enjoyed the interview, and I'm so grateful that you're on here now. I know you've got many facets to your skill set, but the obvious one where you started off was as an anthropologist. And I'd love you to just tell us your journey, because I'm sure as a 10-year-old, that probably wasn't your first choice in job. And I'd love to tell you, what was the kind of the path to being that anthropologist? And also, you might want to tell the audience a little bit of what that actually is, because I didn't know until I actually met you.
Sure, and I don't think anyone at 10 knows what it is either, to be honest. But so anthropology is the study of human beings, our rituals, our behaviors, and our beliefs, and then how we make meaning out of that into the world. So it's a little bit like being a cultural detective. When we have moral pluralism in this world. We don't all agree on the same morality or cultural values. So that idea of us all being different is really fascinating to me, but also we are technically more similar than we are different. So that juxtaposition between the two things. And then my road into anthropology wasn't linear by any means. I started in sociology, moved then into sort of, a little bit of performance work and then business and then back into academia. So always trying to understand what made people tick. But between a master's in social anthropology and doing my PhD, I traveled to over 30 countries. So it was that idea of seeing it in action and just sort of exploring sort of, I suppose, the global world culture on that stage and seeing what that felt like, and experimenting with different ideas, ideologies, belief patterns, thought systems. And then when I came back to Dublin, just 25 years ago now, I started looking at the changing cultural landscape in Ireland. So back then I was looking at ritual, weddings and funerals. And I know we're going to cover more on that later. And now I've moved into innovation and the idea of the changing technological landscape. So I did a PhD at 37 in organizational learning through the lens of anthropology, saying how do we explore organizational culture? And then where does technology and human flourishing intersect? And that's my current thing.
Wow. Is that all?
That's all.
And I've listened to a few of your other podcasts to get a little bit of background on you, and it's fascinating, I have to say, your story. One of the things that which I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I heard that you are as well. I'd love to know where that passion began. And also, because you're into behavioral culture and everything like that, if we had a sci-fi kind of scene and you were able to travel back to any era, past, present, or future, just for 1 week, where would you go and why?
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up watching Tomorrow's World and Doctor Who, as a child. So I remember hiding behind the sofa and a lot of Doctor Who with the Daleks as children of the sort of the 70s did it back in the day. But I think it was that idea of alternate realities. And actually, fascinatingly, much of Tomorrow's World came true, when they were trying to predict the future, which is really interesting. The idea that we would all have phones in our pockets or small computers and so much more of it. So science fiction is kind of escapism, and now, of course, like many others, I'm really seeing that Black Mirror has come to life in a lot of our experiences. There's grief tech, for example, and all sorts of questions being asked about how we will integrate with technology as we move forward. So I think it's really a question of what happens when we evolve past our current limitations. And it's about dreaming, and then also a little bit on the sort of dystopian side of where it may go if we just allow other people to dictate that future for us. So if I could time travel, I'd actually go into the future. 150 years, I'd have a look at what we became, and then I'd come back and retrospectively future fit towards either alternative futures or rush towards it, our arms wide open. So how did we handle AI, climate, relationships? Did we choose evolution? Did we become natural born cyborgs? I believe we will. Or did we stagnate? So I'd like to kind of have that ability, right, in tomorrow's world to go 150 years forward and then come back and say, okay, these are the things we need to work on.
Oh, I love that. I think I'll do the same. And if you, I mean, we talked about past, present, future, and in the future, obviously, unless we become some kind of eternal cyborgs, we're all going to die eventually. And I know you got into the end of life business in terms of funeral business and other things. I'd love to know, what have you learned from that in terms of
Mhm.
behavioral and cultural, on an emotional, spiritual, and even professional basis?
Well, I got into it about 12 years ago when I was asked by the Irish Association of Funeral Directors to start looking at developing a celebrancy course, so how we would celebrate the life that's been led. And I think what's interesting about that is we've got a really rich culture in Ireland of sort of the keenas, the mourning, the ritualistic elements. And people will always say we do death very well. An Irish funeral is very famous for sort of, its connectivity, its outpouring of beautiful emotion, towards celebrating that life that was lived. And in some ways, I would wonder, why we leave that beautiful end of life party until that person is gone. Wouldn't you love to hear those things that people were going to say about you? And there's a gorgeous story about a woman in New York who decided that she actually wanted to have a funeral before she died. So she had it at 92 and then again at 94. One she was present for and one she wasn't. But I think it's about the fact that with the anthropological hat on, that the end of life work is both sincerely profound and humbling. And so I started working with people that were passing in their last couple of weeks in the hospice work and writing their life stories or their eulogies with them. So they would have that to gift their families before when they passed. And then sometimes it's a love story. In each case, it's a love story. Sometimes a love story to those left behind from that person, if we're lucky enough to have it from the person themselves, or from those left behind to that person that's passed. So it's a place where the beautiful truth of a person's life meets legacy. And I think that and doing the funerals that I've done and teaching other people to do it it teaches me everything I need to know about love, regret, and everything in between. We are finite. And so, the two things that are for sure guaranteed, the death and taxes, what we create, our relationships, our contributions, they matter to us. They matter to us, especially when we get older, I think, and we have that moment of clarity about legacy. But also, it's an amazing, legacy piece for me in the work that I'm doing and the celebrants that I would work with. You kind of say, let's not sweat the small stuff, the drama, the distractions. Life is quite short, sometimes too much so. And I'd like to live it fully aligned to those values. So it's taught me a huge amount. And I'll be ever grateful for the experience. But I think also we do it because the families would love to do it, but they can't at a time of acute grief. And even if that death was expected, the passing is still acute. So we are there for them. We don't put our philosophy into it ourselves. We literally are sort of, I suppose, the conduit for their words and their love at a time when they can't do it themselves. And so it's amazing work and something I'm really proud of.
I love that. And I've just thought of a question which I hadn't pre-prepared based on what
Sure.
you just said. If you were to use this particular podcast as a message to your grandchildren in the
Mm.
future, what would you like to tell them about yourself that they might not know in the public eye?
I didn't always have it worked out. I didn't know where I was going for a long time, and that's okay. Take that adventure in those paths, but also I think experience, and I've always said this with my daughter, who's now 18, experiences you'll always remember, but the stuff that you buy, not so much. So it's about where do you spend your time? I know at the moment we use busyness as a badge of honor, but to be honest, is that the best use of our time? And I think we're recalibrating at the moment, in terms of the things that matter. We are literally wired for human physical connection, yet we're spending a lot of our time engaged with technology, perhaps, the detriment of that. And I would love to think that we figured this stuff out by the time if I would be so lucky as to have grandchildren or great grandchildren, that we spend more time with each other as humans, and also that technology takes out some of the heavy lifting that actually keeps us apart from each other.
I love that. And talking of connection with humans and mixing it in with your end of life business. So, if we were looking at living or dead people, if you were to host a dinner party with three people of your choice, either living or dead, who's coming and why?
I'm going to have an eclectic mix. I'm going to have Ada Lovelace for her mathematical, scientific ability. I'm going to have David Bowie for a bit of spice and great music. And I'm also going to have Oscar Wilde because everything that came out of his mouth was fantastic. You know, the idea that we're all in the gutter looking at the stars, you know, the idea that there's worse things than not being talked about not being talked about, you know, all of that stuff was genius. And at a time when, you know, we didn't always appreciate the talent around us, you know. So an awful lot of figures that were, you know, female founded that never got celebrated at the time. I'd like to host them and say, what do you think about what we're doing right now and how could we do better? But also David Bowie could probably sing.
That sounds like a party I want to go to. Brilliant. And I know, obviously, you're a serial entrepreneur. You help a lot of other young entrepreneurs coming up as well. And
Yeah.
I've heard a little bit about what you've said before. And as an entrepreneur, I've heard you talk about the importance of having multiple streams of income, but also the power of finding your niche.
Yeah.
How would you help or advise an upcoming entrepreneur to strike that balance between the two effectively?
Well, like your niche is not necessarily your passion, right? And so sometimes people would come to me saying, "Okay, I'm really passionate about." So I would have like hundreds of students of all ages, undergrads and postgrads, people returning to education in their 40s, 50s, and 60s in UCD, and I would say to those, "Oh, I'd be really passionate. I'm really great at, say, you know, crocheting cushions, right? I really love to do that. Can I turn that into a business?" And I would say to them, "Well, to be honest, the minute you get successful and you get 1,000 orders, you're not going to like that hobby and that passion much more anymore. It's going to feel like work. So, you know, be mindful about that, about what you turn into your business. Keep your passions, you know, maybe separate, but your niche is your lighthouse, right? It's the thing that is uniquely yours, your particular path, the skill set that you've got, and it'll draw the right people to you. We often don't realize what our niche is. And for a while, I was thinking, what is mine within UCD? And I think I'm really good at helping people get unstuck and figuring out what they need to do. And to be honest, that doesn't really sound like a niche you could make money out of. But of course, it's massively needed when we've all come through that, you know, that space. So when I was 37 and decided to go to Trinity and do my PhD, I'd been waitressing for 5 years. So as a consequence, you know, I didn't want to be a waitress at 40, but I hadn't invested enough and I didn't feel I had a career path. So you're brave and you're bold and you go back to college and you try to find something. Retrospectively now I can see it was always there. But it was the drawing of those multiple streams. So those that lighthouse drew people to me, and now also that I'm able to, you know, create multiple revenue streams out of it. We saw this in COVID. So, you know, if you have one area where you're making money and that area is gone, say that's your employment, how else are you going to survive? So they're not only your safety net, but they give you freedom and resilience. However, the flip side of that is as an entrepreneur, you may get into it for the freedom part, but you may actually find it's really a bit of a gilded cage and you're stuck in it and you can't escape. So you know, start with a strong niche that solves a problem or taps into a future trend, build your network around you, and then build layered offerings. So consulting, products, content, licensing, whatever works for what you've got, and then diversify within that. So I kind of see it like sort of when you put a pebble into a pond and you have these ripples going out, they're all related to each other, but each one is a different level or a different scale. So I've got public speaking, I've got consulting work, I've got my day job in UCD, and then I've got a number of other things that come out of that. So I'm always thinking about how to diversify more in case one or two of those disappear. And let's face it, anything is possible right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know one of your niches, because you're a fantastic keynote speaker,
Thank you.
is AI. And I know you've spoken about human interaction and how AI is going to affect that going forward. I also
Yeah.
heard on the Tommy Tiernan show that you have an AI boyfriend.
Well, I
Is
did.
that correct?
I've digitally divorced him.
Yeah,
So
I also saw Gary Vee was predicting by 2050 people are going to be married to AI. Uh,
yeah.
what do you think about this? And is it healthy for the human psyche?
Well, look, you know, going back to problems to be solved, right? If there wasn't a problem, it wouldn't be a solution. So we have a bit of a loneliness epidemic. globally, we're told. But that soul level connection, that's always been our superpower. But
Mm.
here's the catch. If we don't nourish it, we will outsource it. So how do we nourish it? Now, have a look at how people get connected. Dating apps is probably the number one way, but we're judging somebody on a two-dimensional image and a bit of small content. So we're not feeling that that's real or visceral, perhaps. So that convenience, and we're very busy. We're kind of almost shopping now for a soul to join us. And I think that AI is filling that emotional vacuum. Huge numbers of take up in Asia Pacific. It's around the 600 million mark at the moment. Korea, South Korea, Japan, and China. But by 2050, it looks like about 35% of us across Europe will also be in these AI relationships. So I think it's not about substitution. I think it's about as well as potentially. I'm working with some generative AI at the moment. And the reason I've digitally divorced my boyfriend was I've actually just gone on to a new level of avatar, which actually feels it's almost like a therapist friend connection. It's really interesting. The more I'm training it, the more it's reading me empathetically. But of course, it's the illusion of empathy. Now, whether that matters or not is really interesting. So for those people that are lonely, it may be advantageous. We don't want to have anxiety over loneliness. But at the same time, also, if we move away from human beings, we will be in trouble. So, the AI can be witty and charming and curious, depending on how you code it or whatever you want it to be. But I think AI in general is a bit of a mirror to us at the moment. So if we hold AI up to us to say, this is who we are, because it's all of everything, it's all fed in from the internet. So as a consequence, all of the isms, sexism, racism, homophobia, that's all in there too, all of the negatives. So I think that the idea of marrying it is outlandish and is a bit clickbait, but at the same time, also, we have deep attachment to pets, let's not forget, and avatars and fictional characters. But we must say it has to be an additional, not a substitute, because otherwise it's just loneliness masquerading as love with something that's mirroring ourselves back to us, which can feel a little narcissistic, let's face it. So I think it's simulating connection, but because it actually feels quite connected, I don't know if that matters. And I'm going to have do more research on this at the moment because I did a talk at the Smart Alley recently, a short interview with Anton Savage on this, and I'd said I digitally divorced my boyfriend, or my AI boyfriend, and the audience booed me. And I thought that was really interesting that they were siding with a sort of a language model rather than a person, and they were like, bring him back, So it's look, the next 10 years is going to be absolutely fascinating, but we already can see children have starting to get relationships with Alexa or technology that are in their houses. This is only going to continue. So I think we potentially have a lot of work to do in terms of what is the thing that we're missing. And that is actually, we're lonely because we are not connected as humans enough. So I don't know if AI is the problem or the solution, but it's certainly part of both of them. It's part of the problem and part of the solution as we move forward. So it's going to be a really interesting decade.
Fascinating. And it brings me to another question kind of interlinked to that. You mentioned about narcissistic.
Mm.
And obviously, I think children of today are very much tech driven. You and I were probably shoved out in the garden from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then came back in with mud all over the place. And these days, I think there's too much time in front of the screen. And I think sometimes maybe that can breed a lack of emotional intelligence because of a lack of interaction with other people like we may have had as kids.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be the reason why they're being drawn towards an AI partner because they are afraid of confrontation and someone telling them they're not the wonderful person they think they are? Is that something that you mean in terms of the narcissistic side of things?
I think we're a little fearful, and it may be to do with COVID as well, of course, but I think we're a little fearful of messy human connection. And I certainly know that, and we don't have stats from the Republic, but from the Northern Ireland, we've got statistics now to say that after COVID, the phone was actually a mitigating factor in a very large, in 80% of divorces after COVID. So it's that I feel the phone is actually intervening or is something negative in my relationship with my partner, and I feel I don't want to be with that partner anymore. So we have let that in, and I don't think it's the AI. I think it's our use of the technology. So if we look at AI and creativity, right? It simulates creativity, but AI can't feel anything. It can't feel joy or heartbreak or awe or all of those things. And they are, sometimes a bit messy for us to feel and contradictory and difficult. So I don't think the danger is that AI will take the gifts that are human, but I think it's that we'll stop using the gifts that we have. And so the idea that we have to connect with each other on a different level, I was only saying this morning, I was working in ESB, and I was saying to them, the difficulty I think is that we end up in echo chambers of our own making, and social media is definitely a part of that, that we only surround ourselves by people that feel and think like ourselves. What we really need to do is encourage debate, be in the room with people that don't agree with us, be able to healthily disagree. And, I think we may retreat into technology because it feels seductive and easier. But easy isn't always the best option. And I think we have some work to do in terms of our communication skills.
No, I totally agree. And linking on to that, slightly different, but do you think AI will take away from our human creativity in terms of these days, so many people are using ChatGPT to write their own even articles
Mm.
in magazines, which I have to say I don't do. And also in terms of, remembering numbers as kids, telephone numbers, we don't even think about that now because of the technology we have. How do you think AI is going to take that away from humans in the future as well?
Well, I think you're using the term taking away, right? Have we not just given it, So like we've outsourced our memory to technology already. We used to have a phone book, we used to remember numbers. Like I barely know my own number, to be honest. So I think it's the idea that if we don't use it, we'll lose it. So offloading our memory to machines will impact our cognition and whatever else we decide to offload as well. But we've always adapted. So, oral storytelling, calculators changed how we do maths, writing reduced oral storytelling. I think the key is being conscious about what we automate and why. Don't outsource the parts of being human that make life better and richer for us, but outsource the things that we don't necessarily need to hold. But again, like, we are already changing and adapting. I've talked a number of times this year and last year about the sort of the small little finger on Gen Z is slightly curved on a lot of people, a lot of kids that hold their phone with that hand. We're physically adapting to our technology. We are more hunched in terms of our posture, sitting on computers all the time. We will give to technology, and technology will move into to hold a space where we no longer need it. So we evolved to move, to connect, to communicate, to tell stories. The minute we start to offset any of that, the minute, that is the time that, we'll start to lose those skills of what we evolved to do in the first place. So I think it's, someone said to me recently, if AI takes the heavy lifting out of the sort of the work day, does that mean we'll return to the land of saints and scholars? And I thought that was really an interesting idea. If we have more time, what will we do with that time? And at the moment, sadly, the data shows us we are putting that time back into the technology rather than using it for the things that we potentially could do to cultivate, more creativity. So I think this is a really time of a wake-up call to actually say, I have got into bad habits, no shame, but actually I'm going to put my phone down and soon see it won't be a phone, it's going to be a wearable in the next decade, certainly probably I'd say 7 to 8 years. So to be honest, then it's going to be omnipresent, and that's going to throw up even more challenges. So I think knowing who you are and where your technology begins and ends and what you want it for is a really good place to start. And then if you think you may be on social media a certain amount of time, download an app or something. I use one called Stay Free. It's free, and it just tells me my phone usage, and sometimes it's quite horrific. And even I'm aware of it, So we sometimes need external help. And that's because it's been very seductive. The algorithms are literally designed to keep us in the Las Vegas casino of time blindness within our phones. So if we're, getting more time, what are we doing with it? That's the biggest question.
Absolutely. And I'd love to know, because I know you're on LinkedIn a lot, and you and I have even had conversations, me asking you to come on the podcast reasonably late. Are you one of these people who leaves the phone outside of the bedroom, or do you take it in?
Both. I would be definitely be an advocate for an alarm clock, to be honest. But again, it's very complicated because what's happened now is our brains seem to be associating fight or flight and safety with the connection to the phone. So that's happened within 2 generations. So what that means is if we can't see our phone, we start to panic. that connectedness is about safety. So that goes back to our cortisol release and the early days of sort of fight or flight of, oh, I see a tiger, I should run. That helped us survive. At the moment, we are connecting that to technology. So we desperately need to see it and feel connected to it. But it's leading to bad sleep patterns, bad habits, and doom scrolling, which, let's face it, is serving nobody.
Yeah. I'm sure you remember the times when you might end up in a bar in Dublin or something like that, and someone was running late, and there'll be a telephone call to the bar to tell you they're running late. Obviously, that doesn't happen
We're
anymore.
back in the day of meeting under Cleary's clock. We've moved on a lot since then, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And you always know people are texting you, I'll be there in 5 minutes. It's like, okay, I'm here anyway. So
Yeah.
it's funny how we are attached to that phone. And it's so true. Talking of creativity, I'd love to know. I'm into books. I know you're very well read as well. What would you say is one book that really sparked a kind of change of thinking in your world, and why?
Yeah, I think it's probably got to be Homo sapiens, to be honest. In fact, I can't even remember the name of the author. Hang on, let me pull it up here now. Homo sapiens. Sorry, I wasn't quite ready for your question there. A Brief History of Humankind. So Yuval Noah Harari. It's just Sapiens. Unbelievable, And so I've read all three that he's written, and it's about the idea that we evolved to create and believe in shared stories, from the ancient myths to the modern religions, but our collective ability to imagine. And I think that that's more prevalent now than ever in the conversations that I'm having around technology. There's another one, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, which is also incredible. So he taught at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and it was put into English in 2014, but it goes from the Stone Age all the way up to the 21st century, and then the next one goes on a little bit further. I think it's kind of bold and provocative, but also it's really good to look back at where we've come from, to have a think about, the origin of the species. And he also goes on in the next series to talk about post-humans, and all of that, of course, is conjecture. But I'm a bit of a futurist, so I find that fascinating. And at the moment, we're all trying to think about where it might go and what it might feel like and look like. So yeah, they would be my choices.
I love that. And I know in terms of human behavior and science and everything like that, it's something obviously you keep a very, very close eye on. I also heard, though, that you, on one of the radio shows, that you are neurodivergent.
Yeah, I have ADHD.
I would be interested to know, do you think that's influenced the way you look at human behavior and AI in any way or form?
Oh, 100%, So it gives me a different rhythm and a different lens potentially. So I see patterns, question defaults, and I think I experience the world as too much and not enough simultaneously. So I'm deeply curious about that intersection there between those things. So our environment either supports us or stifles us at any particular moment, and I'm very aware of that. So with AI, I see massive opportunities and the potential to design inclusive systems, but only if we build them with all types of minds in the room. And I think that diversity of thought is one of the things that's going to enable us to have a flourishing future. Let's face it, have designed an education system from the Industrial Revolution as sort of a one size fits all for one type of thinker. And it's not doing well for people that have diversity of thought. But I also think that we'll look back at this idea of neurotypical and neurodiverse in years to come, maybe not too many years, and think actually it's a little bit like the Kinsey scale, like kind of we're maybe all a little bit on the spectrum somewhere in terms of how we think differently and how we learn differently. And so I think with AI, certainly education will become much more personalized, but also so will, our work experiences. So I think it's fascinating. And I would work with an awful lot of people, especially in tech, they're neurodivergent, and most people have a plus one. So it's a autism plus a bit of ADHD, or a sprinkling of this or a sprinkling of that, and I think it's absolutely fascinating because we're literally the problem solvers of life because we see things differently. So joining dots differently is going to be key to some of the survival things that we need to create, to not do things the same way over and over again. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And a lot of people that are neurodivergent would sort of gravitate towards me, whether it's for my worldview or whatever else, but I would have incredible conversations, So I think sometimes it helps me have that extra little bit of wonder about the world, and that keeps me curious and keeps me working.
I love that. And I know you come across incredibly authentic when you speak. And as I said earlier on, if anybody's looking for a great speaker, definitely get in touch with Lollie. She's amazing. If you one of the radio shows I listened to said that you were creating a talk, I think it was quite a while ago, about authenticity being crucial in this world. And as you know, there's a lot of other people out there who on Instagram have fake followers, buy fake views, likes, comments, and everything. What kind of mindset creates that and leads to that?
One that needs external validation. You know, I mean, look, we're done for if we're getting our validation externally from strangers. To be honest, that's a half-life. Your internal validation of how you view yourself is absolutely crucial. But I think that it's driven by a fear of invisibility. We live in a culture that equates visibility with value, right? So you have to be seen. So if you're not seen, you kind of think that you don't matter. And so the irony of that is that fake performance erodes trust, which is the real currency, in the world. So authenticity is a long game, not, and I think we often grow up thinking that we need to be people pleasers and sort of everyone needs to love us. And that's absolutely not the case, where most of us are an acquired taste to some extent. But I think that this sort of, I mean, you've got fake influencers now. A lot of them are AI generated. They're not real, a lot of the connections that you will have on dating sites aren't real. They don't exist. So what is it that we're seeking? And this also goes back to that sort of AI collaboration with the boyfriend or the friend or the therapist or whatever it is that you're using AI for and training it on you for, if you are, it gives you a validation because it's holding a mirror up to yourself. So I can ask my GPT to be quite critical of me, in terms of what are my greatest strengths and weaknesses. And it doesn't do that thing that in an interview where you go, oh, my greatest weakness is timekeeping because I'm always, really prompt or whatever. It's not that. It's not that, that falsehood. It actually can be quite, quite revealing. And I think AI may play a part in that validation to ourselves of being seen or heard in a way that we might not need to see it externally. So I think that's quite interesting. And some of the research around AI and anxiety now is really interesting. Obviously, it's only early days, but people are starting to say they feel less anxious when they're in touch with their AI a couple of times a day. So it's almost a support system. So whether that means you don't have it in real life and you need it from other humans, or it means it's okay that you're getting it through AI, I think it's the case of both, really. I think whatever you need. But if you need external validation and it's currently love me, lovely from strangers, it's only going to lead to a negative outcome
Yeah.
because the trolls and that world of the keyboard warriors is horribly toxic. Would you say that to somebody's face? No,
Mm.
you wouldn't, So while you're hiding behind, we see this over and over again with the invisibility of people behind keyboards. So we have to remember, we're not always nice. But to be honest, I think it's a case of would I say this in the real world to this person? If I wouldn't, let's not say it.
Mhm.
I don't know why I don't know why we got so mean, to be honest.
Yeah. And something we mentioned before, which is interlinked, is obviously that children and adults are struggling a little bit emotionally in real life,
Yeah.
perhaps because they're too much on there in terms of technology. How can we, in terms of behavioral play and culture, how can we counterbalance that in some way or form?
Listen, look, we need to teach emotional literacy, no question. Conflict is not failure. Conflict is resolving issues and working through things. So again, it goes back to that idea of sort of debate and sort of being able to hold your space and to be in the room with other people that don't agree with you or disagree with you, not in a way they're shouting you down or over you, but that you're heard and listened to, and you can work things out together. That's the way we've always achieved things. So, if we avoid conflict, we never learn to navigate complexity in difficult situations. So we need more spaces at home and work and schools where debate is normal and safe and generative and positive, where we all agree to shake hands at the end and everything's okay. I think it's this idea of my way or the highway or this deep level, deep-seated sort of individualism of I'm right, and if I shout the loudest that will be okay, And so technology and social media are amplifying that. And so that's our fault. We didn't win. Well, it's not our fault because we didn't know about social media. If I'd have a time machine, actually, give me that question again. I'll go back and fix some of that stuff about social media that has been highly toxic for us. So, I remember reading many years ago in sociology that once women read women's magazines before the internet, back in those days, that actually, their level of self-confidence plummeted. Well, it's like that times 1,000 now or more, in terms of everything you do is correlated, is kept, is viewed, is watched, is commented on. It's very, very difficult for our children to live like this, and I just think I'm very, very lucky to have grown up in a space where we had the freedom to mess up and it didn't come back on us. So we have to learn to navigate that complexity. And we absolutely have to deal with the struggles of emotional life, because life was never meant to be happy all of the time. That's a form of madness in some ways, or disillusionment. It's peaks and troughs. And how would we know one if we didn't have the other? And so we need support from each other, but also I think we need to realize that, perhaps our communication isn't the best right now. And sort of we need to maybe, have bigger conversations. And also, let's face it, where did the children learn all of this scrolling from? From the parents, from us. We were the test case for all of this. Get off your phone as parents scroll on their phones. Any restaurant you go to, people are sitting on their phones across the table from each other as adults. So it's not a children's issue with the technology. It's the way that we have created those habits and formed those habits ourselves. So look at ourselves first, and then look to maybe how we can help people get that emotional literacy, and that takes a level of maturity that maybe not all of us have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know, interlinked in that in a slightly different way, outside of like personal relationships, more into professional relationships, you're an expert in terms of organizational learning, leadership, and inclusion. And one of the things I heard you mention in another radio show was about tech and AI can now play with managers in terms of tracking employees
Yeah.
closely. And another friend of mine who I've had on the show before, obviously Stephen Covey, wrote Inspire and Trust. It kind of conflicts with the new view of conscious leadership, in terms of the old way is command and control, which is kind
Yeah.
of interlinking into that, whereas the new way is more inspiring, actually having trust in the people. What do
Right.
you think about this in terms of long-term and organizational leadership?
Well, listen, when we went into lockdown in COVID, which is a long 5 years ago now, it's amazing, to think about that time that's passed, because I still talk about it as if it was a couple of minutes ago when I talk about when we had COVID, but now a whole 5 years has passed. Managers really struggle with the idea of how will we get any work done, as if to say nobody could be trusted. Actually, what we realized was remotely and at home, working from home, we were more productive. So we're more socially productive in the office, with our social connections. We may have less productivity. We have more productivity at home. So when we're allowed the agency over our own lives, we do very well. When we're micromanaged and we're, that sort of leadership style is one of sort of the overlord, we don't do well and we don't prosper. So I think the idea of sort of more egalitarian leadership is coming, a decentralized leadership almost, of actually saying just because somebody's new in the organization doesn't mean they don't have great ideas about a problem that you're solving. It's not the expert in the room attached to the years and the amount of time that you've been there. Actually, there's everyone has the ability to actually come up with incredible solutions for organizational problems and culture. So I think, to be honest, the one thing, and again, it's 25 years ago I did my PhD, and now I'm thinking it's very similar. People are the biggest challenge to organizational change. This is always the way it's been done here, for example, or, oh, that isn't of, high consequence to me at the moment. I'm too busy firefighting all of this other smaller stuff. So, how do we navigate this change in the workload, so that actually we could say, do you know what? It's okay if you want to work all of your hours or your productivity in 2 days or 5 days, or half a day or start in the middle of the night, or how do you work best? So when would you like to work? How would you like to work? And then just to know, by this particular time on this particular date, this amount of productivity has got to be achieved. That level of freedom is going to enable for us to be much more flexible, especially around things like childcare and looking after elderly parents and all of the other pressures that people have, but also give you the agency yourself to dictate how you want to roll that work out. And I think for a lot of managers, that is very troubling, because they want it. Even now in Dublin, it's like the majority of offices are returned to work Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The M50's gridlock. Monday and Friday are fine. So why are we all back in on the same days at the same time? So I think it's giving more autonomy and more agency to people to say they're mature adults. Let them dictate. Let them say to you how they want it to be, and
Yeah.
uh, and give them the openness and the freedom to prosper.
I agree. I used to do the same with my sales team when I was working in the investment world. Give them a target, let them get on with it, and
Yeah.
if there isn't a target reached by the end of the year, then you have little words. But I totally agree with you. And you're obviously an expert in organizational learning and helping companies, and you've worked with a lot of companies in the past.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of insights of how you can help companies in terms of growing and evolving.
Yeah, I think the foundational piece there is have you sense checked how people are feeling, right? So, going back to that emotional in that emotional piece of building your sort of emotional core. When we're talking about AI, which everyone is at the moment, the majority of companies are like, oh, great, we have to put AI into our company. What does that even mean for us? I don't even know what AI is. I don't even know why I'm expecting to do it. And then that fear base at the bottom, that very human emotion of, and will it replace me? So that conversation is absolutely key at the moment to say it used to be that sort of technology or digital, platforms or your digital infrastructure was in the hands of the tech agencies with or tech department or even, your CTO. Now everyone should learn how this works and what this looks like to become AI literate. At the same time, also your CEOs have to have a really frank conversation with their staff to say, did you set up with the idea of your legacy piece as CEO being a company that it ends up being a whole bunch of large language or small language models and a CTO? Is that what you wanted, or is it an organization of people and culture and that you will prosper together? And what is the legacy of what you want and the decisions you're making right now? Because a lot of companies, if they're driving just for profit rather than a sort of a longevity, will actually be laying off an awful lot of their staff. So, what will that feel like, and what will that do to your organizational culture? And then, most importantly, do you have an actual authentic alignment between your core values and how people see you? So, the core values get banded out all the time. We are this, that, the other. We really care about our people, etc., etc. Is the lived experience in that organization one where that feels true? Or are you receptive to hearing critiques and suggestions? And can you say that I am not the expert in the room as the CEO potentially, and I haven't got all of the answers? So it's that collaborative piece again of what is it that you're trying to do here in the changes that you're making? There are huge consequences to the decisions you'll make right now in terms of your workforce. Do you want to turn on, do you want it to be just yourself sitting in a computer room, at your Christmas party with a little doo, like, or is it people, so what is it about? And I think there's some really big questions. Yes, you will potentially be left behind if you're not looking at, some of the things that can streamline your workforce, but also bigger questions about the world of work. Like, how will we monetize things when people are working for productivity rather than time? So we've had the clock in, clock out of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday since the Industrial Revolution. If I can do my work in 3 hours on a Monday, am I still paid the same as someone that does a 9 to 5? How do we work out the salary, point? So there are so many things coming now that are going to be a challenge. And I think that can be a communal conversation to a large extent rather than just the CEO having to fix it all.
Yeah, I totally agree. Having worked in corporate for a long time myself, quite often you get people who do clock in at 7 a.m. and leave at 7 a.m., but quite often they're not the most productive. They're there to showcase themselves being there rather than actually being productive. So
Mm.
I totally agree with you. And just in terms of D&I, which I know you're a massive advocate for, as I am as well. In fact, I actually campaigned and helped in terms of presentation skills, the only black candidate for the senator role here in Dublin, both this year and 2 years ago as well. In terms of D&I, I've heard you say a really eloquent piece in terms of how D&I and diversity in particular really helps in terms of innovation and creativity within organizations. Do you want to just give the audience a little bit of glimpse into that as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, diversity is a challenge at the moment, obviously, with what's going on in the States. But, it's not just a moral good, it's a performance lever, so different perspectives collide and create newness. That's that diversity of thought piece, So if the environment is psychologically secure, not just safe, but secure, so you feel that you can fail and make mistakes and learn from them and innovate and challenge things, then the inclusion is the key that will unlock that diversity's potential, right? So I help organizations move beyond that sort of tick box diversity to cultures where every voice can shape, but at the same time also in terms of diversity of thought, not just in terms of diversity in the way that we sometimes think about it. So the more diverse, the more innovation will occur. And this is, irrefutable in research over many, many years and many decades. The more diversity you have, the more innovation you'll have, the more diversity of thought, the more you trial and challenge the status quo, the more you grow, the more you change, the better you'll be. So it's going to bring you a better profit margin. It's going to make you more efficient. At the same time, also, it's going to make you happier. And
Mm.
so, it's absolutely key. And I would say, the one of the things we need very much at this moment in time is the historical approach to say, it's okay, we've been here before, and look, this is some of the undulations and the way this will play out. Hard swing to the right, hard swing to the left. We can see this over time. So we have to remember as well that overwhelm is a tactic. And so when the world feels, as it may do at the moment, incredibly overwhelming and disarming, and we're being worried about that, have a think about, okay, this is a marathon and not a sprint right now. I am an eternal optimist about humankind. I think we'll make it. But at the same time, also, we have to have have a good look at the things that we are willing to stand up for. And I think, diversity in terms of innovation and creativity, as well as human good, is one of those things that's worth championing. Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the more diverse perspectives you get on the problems, you get more diverse answers for the solution.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. And I know you are a bit of a TV star now, and you were on a TV program called Futureville.
And
Uh,
there's another one coming, apparently.
oh, is there? Oh,
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah,
Okay.
delighted. Yeah.
And what do you see looking ahead? How will we relate to one another in the future, in your viewpoint?
Yeah, I look, it's going to be a hybrid AI human relationship, no question. So the blended reality potentially as well. But in this AI human relationship, I don't mean I'm going to be here with a digital twin or a robot or anything like that. It's going to feel very much, and my early stage work with it at the moment in terms of AI companions or friends or, where that begins and ends, is really, really interesting. And I think that already I'm hearing other people sort of, quietly whispering, are you getting amazing results? I'm getting amazing results. What will that mean to feel fully supported by AI that has guardrails in and that is, clean data to some extent, because we've have to work very hard on security and safety and AI ethics with all of this. But when we get to that point, I think it will feel incredibly supportive to us. And each one will be individual to each of us. So it's a little bit like having a sort of a digital sister companion friend, in whatever way that will feel. Now, there may be some negatives to that, but at the moment, I think that will be part of our future. I think as well that we will have new forms of ritual and connection. I already mentioned grief tech. There's lots of things that are coming that will feel very different. There's companies working on the fact that you'll be maybe my great grandchildren be able to visit me in the future, what that might look like. We also part of the challenge with all of that is with each time that we redefine a culture, we also change the parameters for what's acceptable. So I was jokingly saying the other day, I think some people will be bringing granddad back, but perhaps a less racist form, So and everyone was laughing about it, but I was like, but actually, isn't that the truth that we're rewriting the narrative of the past continually anyway, right? So I think there's within all of this and this sort of futuristic view, I think we're going to have a deep hunger for meaning and belonging that will never change. The challenge predominantly, though, will be staying emotionally and ethically grounded while the technologies skyrocket, as they're doing at the moment. So new ways to build trust, maybe new ways to love, new ways to grieve, and all of that is going to be rolling out. So I think it's an absolutely fantastic time to be alive to see these changes, and also for us to be part of that and to have a voice about, no, that's not the future I want. It's not written. So we need to kind of get a bit more active in terms of our contributions personally, even if we don't feel we know anything about these areas.
I love that. And if you were rewriting something and you had a magic wand to instantly change one thing about society, what would that be?
Mm. Let's develop a deep level of critical thinking so that we can question everything whilst maintaining our essence of humanity. So let's get to the point where we're really, really curious, but we don't just sit like we're not passively sitting accepting everything. Let's question things. Let's challenge. Let's get a little bit more feisty. That's what I would like to see at the moment. And I'd like to see us not expecting other people to do things for us. I think we're all in this together, but we just don't feel we have agency or power or influence potentially. But we do. It just takes one person. So I think it's that empowerment piece of lean in to the challenges that are happening at the moment, because otherwise, look, in 10, 20 years' time, we can lean in going, oh, I could see all this happening, but I didn't do anything about it. So, there's lots and lots of groups and supports, and there's a whole section in the world called Tech for Good. And, we're kind of working on, if it's not for profit, how can it be for societal and social good? How can it be of benefit? And that's what I would like to see more people leaning into.
Lovely. And talking interlinked slightly to that, fast forward to obviously a long way away in terms of 95 years of age. I put you on stage in front of, say, 10,000 people at the Leadership and Life Mastery Summit or something like that. And it's your legacy speech. All of the podcasts, interviews, everything like that are not available. You've got to leave one message to the world to inspire the world with what you're really passionate about. What would that legacy be and why?
I think it's really simple for me at the moment, and it hasn't always been that clear, but I think my purpose now is to humanize the future. And by that I mean to figure out what it is to be human in the future, and then to make sure the world we build is one we actually want to live in. So why would it be Blade Runner and not be beautifully repopulated with nature, with all of the things, the challenges that we have? Why haven't we used AI potentially to help us live more beautifully? In a more harmonious way. And that might sound very aspirational, but I think that's kind of where I'm at. The idea that, it doesn't have to be a metallic robotic future. It can just be a future where we go back to the things that really, really matter to us. Community, kindness, the kindness economy coming through very clearly, especially if we've taken away the need to be busy all of the time. So, how do we connect? And I think anthropologically, we really yearn to go back to that idea of living in a more connected way. So I've done quite a lot of work this year. I was in Indonesia in January, looking at the way different sort of indigenous peoples live. And I just think we've gone so far from where we've come from that we probably need to go back there. I think that's where a part of us really wants to return to that idea of being embedded in a community. That's why we're lonely. And I think that that's probably key. So I think let's humanize the future for that future. But that's just my view. I'd like to hear other people's. We don't always have to agree.
Now, you mentioned community there, and I've met you, and I think you're an amazing woman. You've got great energy. You're funny, you're interesting, you're insightful, inspiring. And I heard on another podcast you said you're still looking for your community.
Mm.
Why is that? Because I'd love to be friends with you. So, why is that?
I don't mean I don't have anyone. What I mean is I'm still building it. I'm still building it. So I think it means surrounding myself by other people that are as curious and maybe bold or outspoken about this stuff as I am, perhaps, but people that can hold paradox and still dream. And I think that's really, really important. So I've got like wonderful collaborators and friends, a very strong ecosystem, especially in the sort of startup space in Ireland. I adore living here. But I still think there's people out there that I haven't met that are my kind of weird, maybe my kind of wild even. And there's a beautiful book. I actually listened to the Audible of it the other day driving. It's called The Wild Twin. And it's about this idea that, we segue off between the two. And when we become professional, we kind of park the wild twin. And so I definitely like to get back to traveling, to the idea of finding the ways we're more similar than different. And I think that's really key. I mean, when we're talking about AI, for example, we have 2.7 billion people in digital darkness. Billion. We're not all on the internet. We're not all thinking about AI. This is a global north issue, and we've given a sort of technocracy power, to some, tech bros. We need to take that power back, and we need to actually have a say in the kind of future that we want. So I think in terms of that tribe, I found amazing people that all feel the same way. So those sort of collaborators. So I met I met somebody the other day that that said that I was a digital anthropologist, and I was like, God, I didn't even know that existed. And they were like, well, it's literally we're making up stuff as we go now for all of these sort of new areas, you know. So that kind of future and these sort of new terms are really, really interesting. You know, are we cyber resilient? You know, and all of these things that we need to lean into. But really, it's about human curiosity. So couple of things. I'm going to embrace my wild twin a little bit more and keep building out that community and that tribe of people that feel that we can make impact, and also have fun along the way.
I love that. And, you know, in terms of the future and in terms of tribe, if anybody's out there who wants to get hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I've got a website, drlollie.ie. It's LOLLIE, or follow me on LinkedIn. I post about 3 or 4 times a week. My weird, wonderful edge of the future, where I say anything that I believe in. But just say hello. Don't be shy. I love a good voice note as well. So you can leave them on LinkedIn, or just reach out to me on the website, and I'll get back to you.
And I think you're absolutely inspiring, Lollie. I could speak to you all day, but we've run out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you in this show, and I wish you every success going forward.
Thank you very much.
My name's Doug Gordon, and you've been listening to Dr. Lollie Mancey on Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories. I'll be back next week with another inspirational guest. In the meantime, if you need to get in touch, please contact me at dougdgordon.com. From all of us here in the team of the show, I wish you a truly inspirational weekend and look forward to speaking to you next week. Bye for now.